Welcome to this video. I'm calling this one Old Testament Signposts, and what I hope to do in the next few minutes is give you a kind of way of looking at the Old Testament. And I recognize that the people watching this will come from all sorts of different backgrounds and levels of engagement with the Old Testament. And I want to make this possible for anyone coming fairly fresh to it, or hopefully there'll be things in there that are interesting to people who've been around the Old Testament a little bit more. You can think of it as some steps towards getting a grip or getting to grips with the Old Testament, kind of having the big picture, if you like. We are going to look at a particular verse in this session of Deeper, but I'm not going to engage with that verse really right now in this video. What we're going to look at is the kind of background, the context of that verse, because all the things that I'm talking about here will have already happened by the time that verse comes into existence. In sessions 3 and 4 of Deeper, we looked at 2 verses from the Old Testament. In fact, we looked at 2 verses from the first book of the Old Testament, from Genesis. And now in this third and final verse from the Old Testament, I want to look at a verse that will take us through the sweep of the Old Testament, the whole or a major part of the Old Testament, if you like, hence doing this kind of overview of what the Old Testament involves. So if you were to look at a Bible and look at the contents page near the beginning of a Bible, you would see that the Old Testament has lots of books in it. In fact, there are 39 books. A way of remembering that number is the word old has how many letters in it? 3. And the word Testament has 9 letters in it. And you put those two together side by side, 3 and 9, and you get 39. And that gives you handily the number of books in the Old Testament. Incidentally, the number of books in the New Testament you can get in a similar but slightly different way. How many letters in the word new? 3. How many letters in the word Testament? Obviously 9 again, but this time instead of putting the numbers next to each other, you do 3 times 9 and you get to 27, and that's the number of books in the New Testament. That information won't get you to heaven, but sometimes it's useful to know the kind of structure that you're looking at when you look in more detail. Speaking of the structure of the Old Testament, if you were to break that 39 books of the Old Testament down into to 3 sections, they can generally be divided into the historical section, which is the first 17 books, and then the poetic or poetical or wisdom section, which is 5 books in the middle, and then the prophetic books, which is 17 books at the end, which is kind of interesting how the symmetry works out in the way that we have our English Bible, the Old Testament, put together. You can further break down those writings into the history books can be broken down into the law, which is the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then what are often termed the other historical books, the next 12 books. Then you have the wisdom books, the poetical books, which include Psalms and Proverbs. And then you have the prophetic books, which includes 5, often thought of as 5 major prophets, and 12 minor prophets. The minor prophets are not less important, but in the way that it's thought of, they tend to be somewhat smaller books. Just a helpful way of finding your way through the Old Testament and knowing what the different writings contribute. Now, we're actually going to be looking in this session at a verse from one of the prophets, but it will look back over the history of Israel. So that's the first 17 books, and particularly we'll point out to something that happened starting really in the 2nd book and going through to the 5th book, and then actually on to the sixth book, really, in a way. So that's the sections of the Bible. But if you were to think in terms of what's the storyline of the Old Testament, what's the storyline of the Bible? There are many ways of thinking that. I'm getting buzzed by a fly, but I'm going to keep going. The storyline of the Old Testament, and there are some wonderful ways that have been thought of to help us through that. There is the walk through the Old Testament, which is one that I've done. I did over 20 years ago, and I've tried to keep it in mind ever since. There is a really helpful study that we've done at South Oxley Baptist Church, a course, The Bible, the Big Picture, and that's a good thing to return to from time to time. And then several authors have written books or pamphlets just taking us through the Old Testament storyline, and I recommend that you find a way of doing that just to get a grip of what was going on in the Old Testament. And then as you do other things within reading the Old Testament, you can start to fit things into a framework, and it makes it a whole lot more interesting and a whole lot more satisfying, hopefully. But it also helps you to piece together what God was doing in the big picture. And then you can fit your favorite bits or the new bits that you read. Or if you read through the whole Old Testament, you'll have a framework so that you can see the structure as you go through. There are several ways of doing that at an overview level, but one way that I thought would be helpful for a number of people is just to think of the major characters in the Old Testament. And you may want to pause this video for a few seconds and just think, if you are starting from the character that we got to in the last session of Deeper, the character was Abraham. If you were starting with him as number one, and you wanted to think your way through the storyline of the Old Testament, what 10 characters would you choose? And I'm going to give you a bit of help in terms of the characters that I've chosen. What I'm going to say is that the 10th character will be Solomon. Now, there is a whole section of history of Israel after Solomon, but we're not going to look at that today. So just 10 characters from Abraham to Solomon, and maybe think who they could be. There are a number of ways through it. In a sense, there might not be a definitive right answer, but I'm going to choose 10 characters, and it'd just be interesting maybe for you to take a few moments, maybe to think them through or write them down, or count them off, and then start the video again and see if you get some of the ones that overlap with the ones that I've got. So hopefully you've done that. You've got an idea of who 10 or so characters might be. And so we had Abraham first. Well, Abraham's son, or Abraham's special son, the son of the promise that God gave to Abraham, is Isaac. And then Isaac, one of the sons that he had that the storyline really goes through, was Jacob. And Jacob has his name changed by God to Israel. And Israel, Jacob, has, you might remember, 12 sons. They have varying significance. And a number of people, as we were going through this course, thought of Judah as possibly being someone who you could think the line of Jesus goes through Judah, so he would be important. In terms of the storyline, I think a lot of the detail of the storyline comes through one of the younger sons, Joseph, and Joseph has a particular place. I'm still getting buzzed by this fly. Joseph has a particular place in the storyline, and so I'm going to pick him as someone that you get from Genesis chapter 37 and onwards. And the people of Israel, or the family of Israel at this point, end up going down to Egypt through what happens to Joseph. And you could look at the storyline in a little bit more detail. It's a fascinating story from Genesis 37 to 50. The next character of real significance, possibly one of the two most significant characters, maybe three most significant characters in the Old Testament, would be Moses. Moses was the person that God appointed to deliver the people that he was forming, that he was creating out of the family of Israel, and Moses was the one that would lead them into freedom through a period called the Exodus, or an event called the Exodus. Moses had an apprentice, and his apprentice's name was Joshua, and he would be the next person that I would think of. And Joshua was the person who, led them into the promised land. So now we've got to 6 people. A number of people became judges, and the last significant judge, and he was also an amazing prophet, someone that God spoke to and who declared what God was saying, was a man called Samuel. In fact, there are 2 books named after Samuel. And then Samuel saw a time of transition when people called for a king like the other nations. And this wasn't really God's greatest intention for them, but God did allow them to have a king. And the first king was Saul. And then the second king was David, a man after God's own heart. And one of David's sons, the son who would become king, was Solomon. So that's 10 people, one way of thinking our way through a great chunk of the Old Testament history. And what I hope is that you'll be familiar, maybe very familiar with those characters, or maybe have a vague awareness of them. And you'd find that a way of thinking your way through the Old Testament and what God did in the Old Testament, and use that as a way of linking in some of the greater details. So we've gone Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, Samuel, Saul, David, and Solomon. After Solomon, the kingdom of Israel became divided, and that's a whole other story. So that's the end of this video, and if you want to continue looking at the verse of session 5 of Deeper, then please have a look at that specific video. Bless you, and may your engagement with the Old Testament grow and grow. May you find it inspiring to see how God worked in a particular nation, not just for the nation, but for all peoples. And that will take you back to the previous session where God gave a promise to Abraham.